Hello, friends, and welcome back to Dare Me to Prosper. My name is Avery, and I'm your host. This is episode 47, and we're talking about safety versus freedom. And I feel like this is actually going to apply to more of you than you think it is. The topic is hard to name, but very relevant for all of our lives. And I think if you listen, the more you will see like, oh, yeah, I experienced this. And personally, I'm in an era of a lot of transition, a lot of forward movement, a lot of letting go of the past. And so this is really relevant to me. And anything that's relevant to me, I figure, is probably relevant to a lot of us. Speaking of that, if you are a Patreon member, you'll know I just did a prediction for November energy prediction. I have started doing these each month. And in that prediction, we talked a lot about how November is like the biggest month of the year and what to expect collectively and personally. And that, I think, will offer a lot of clarity. So if you are not yet a Patreon member, definitely check that out. I do an extra episode every single week. But as we get into this insane end of 2025 and beginning of 2026, I think those are going to be even more important. I have been waiting on November all year. And so it's just going to be really wild. So this, I think, is a really good time to talk about this topic of safety versus freedom and why that is such a huge part of your spiritual journey and your life and how your life plays out. Also, I'm really tired. I'm always tired. My family makes fun of me because they're like, yeah, what's new? You're always tired. I am so tired. So I'm going to try to stay upbeat. But if my brain doesn't work very well today, that is why. Okay. But basically this idea is like choosing expansion over the familiar and why so many of us struggle with that and kind of what the pros and cons are to staying in the safety versus expanding into the freedom, even when it's scary, when it's uncomfortable, and basically recognizing when that's happening and when you're kind of like shrinking into your comfort zones and how that might be hurting you versus expanding into a much more, exciting, abundant part of your life, but how we sometimes choose not to do that because it feels scary. And I think for women especially, there can be a pattern, and you've probably felt this way, where maybe something in your life feels like it's too small for you. It's not aligned for you. Like, I don't know if this relationship really fits anymore. I don't know if this career path really fits anymore. I don't know if this part of my life is really what I want, or I feel like I have so much more potential, or I just feel like there's so much more out there. I don't know if I want to live here anymore. I don't know if this is like the direction I want my life to go. But so many of us are held back by the fear of change. Like, but what happens if I choose the other path? Like, that feels really scary. I don't know that path. I'm not familiar with it. It's like the devil, the situation that you're in feels familiar. And so often we choose that over opportunities to go into a more expansive path because it feels safer. For example, before I left my marriage earlier this year, literally for like 2 years, I thought about this and really kind of knew that that's what I wanted. But like so many women, what held me back was the splitting up of the family. It wasn't so much the relationship itself. I kind of knew that had died a long time ago, but it was the splitting up of the family. I've got 3 kids, and I just thought, I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't know if I can handle it. What if I can't handle like not seeing my kids as much? Like, what's it going to do to them? Are they going to be okay? What's that going to look like? Like, where are we going to go? Like, that part was so scary. And you can listen to the divorce episode on the Patreon if you are interested in hearing like the whole background story and how I went through everything and all of that. But basically, it was the fear of not knowing what that would look like on the other side and how the family structure would change that held me back for a really long time. And so it just progressively got worse for 2 years until I finally was like at a breaking point. And I was like, I literally cannot do this anymore. I have no more tears left to cry. I like just couldn't handle it. That point where you're like, I don't care what happens at this point. Anything would be better than this. And thankfully, everything has turned out a lot better than I would have expected, and everything turned out fine. And I, now looking back, I'm like, I wish I would have done it a long time ago, which is a very common sentiment you hear among women, specifically who leave marriages. And honestly, that was one of the things that encouraged me. But that's just like one example that I think a lot of people can relate to. But there's lots of examples like that of I chose the path of security, even though it wasn't the best path, even though that was the path that was worse for me and my kids, quite honestly. Long term, I was so afraid of how the dynamic would change and what would happen on the other side and what it would look like. I was so afraid that I would regret the family splitting, not regret leaving the relationship, but the family splitting, that I hung on for a really long time, just thinking, I don't know, I'm too afraid. And now that I'm here on the other side, all I can think is, why didn't I do that sooner? And we've talked about this in other episodes, but your nervous system is wired to crave safety because it's wired to keep you alive, right? It's wired to, help you stay alive and run away from the bear, run away from danger, be on alert. And so the problem is that our body doesn't necessarily know how to categorize a real danger from a perceived danger. And so your whole nervous system just tries to keep you safe with anything because all it knows is, I know this, it's the devil I know. If I'm familiar with it, I know how to stay safe in that scenario. If I'm not familiar with it, I don't know how to feel safe, and therefore I'm scared to go down that path because I don't know what will happen. And that is how our bodies are built, to keep us safe, and that serves a purpose, certainly. But it is a huge hindrance when it comes to not being able to see past your nervous system and see past your wiring in order to choose paths that are actually much more abundant, much more free, much more aligned for you. Like being scared to take the leap and leave your job and start a business, being scared to leave a relationship, or maybe being scared to start dating somebody new, being scared to move across the country, being scared to have children. I mean, there's literally not anything you couldn't apply this to, because this is such a front-facing issue for all of us. Because your soul craves freedom, but your nervous system craves safety. And at one point or another, like one of those things is always getting its way. But if your nervous system gets its way 100% of the time, you are going to miss out on opportunities that are meant for you, that will change your life, that will bring you into abundance and expansion and, who you are meant to be, your overall purpose and the things that will ultimately bring you the most joy if you're too scared to make change in your life. So, to kind of like paraphrase, this episode is really about understanding how your nervous system and your soul are often competing for what they want, and they respond differently to different situations. And what we want to figure out is how to choose freedom while also rewiring what you perceive as safety. Because it doesn't mean we're going to go jump off of cliffs with no plan and we're going to, buy a one-way plane ticket. Like you can do that, but you don't have to do that. You don't have to abandon all logic and safety. That's not the goal. The goal is to rewire what safety actually means and really consider what you are losing out on when you are too afraid to make expansive choices. The nervous system is important, and I've been meaning to do a whole episode on the nervous system. I've done some before. The nervous system is something that, as this is so relevant right now, because as planets change and the energy changes, our nervous system is going to be just front and center more than it already has been in the past, I don't know, like 5-10 years, where there's so much focus on mental health and so much focus on high cortisol and like grounding, because we're so used to, this is like Pluto and Capricorn energy, right? We're so used to like the hustle and the grind, and we have to carry everything and we have to do all the things, and like we have stressed ourselves out beyond what is sustainable for everyone. And so we really are kind of moving into this time, this Pluto and Aquarius time, which is much more like we're moving into a time where what's going to serve you the most is making sure that your nervous system is grounded, that you feel safe, not in a way where you don't make any new choices, but your nervous system feels calm, so that when you take an expansive choice, when you take the road that's less known, it doesn't feel like such a threat. It doesn't feel so dangerous. It's kind of like rewiring your nervous system to not be afraid of everything. It's like healing your anxiety, right? Your body is so used to be like, there's danger over here, there's danger over there, and that's danger, and that's danger. And we need to like rewire and help our body to understand that not everything is danger. And if we kind of ground and like bring our baseline frequency, our baseline nervous system down a few notches, so we're calm and we're grounded and we're at peace, then when opportunities or just new things pop up that might have sent your nervous system into a spiral, when those come up and you're grounded, you can be like, okay, let me, think about this and go about this logic. It's not like an immediate red flag scary. Does that kind of make sense? Because it's not bad. Your nervous system is not bad or wrong for wanting to keep you safe. It is your body's need to preserve your life, to preserve what is known, to stay regulated, to avoid chaos, right? That stuff is important. But the problem is we live in such a stressful society that it just runs away with it. And it's like everything is a threat. Nothing is safe. I don't want to do anything. I have social anxiety. I have driving anxiety. I have anxiety over it's so out of hand. And I'm preaching to the choir. This has absolutely been me too. And my nervous system is something I've been avidly working on for a long time now, especially the past few months. But your nervous system really wants you to stay in routine, stay in control, hesitate before you do anything. And some of that is needed. You need some of that to build stability, right? I mean, you don't want to just be so flippant that, every decision is made flippantly and you're just kind of floating around and doing whatever. There's a reason we need stability and we need our nervous system to help us remember like what's a good idea and what's not. But your soul at a soul level craves expansion and growth and creation and curiosity. And that often goes against that stable, grounding, secure, this is what I know feeling. The problem is that safety doesn't leave any room for alignment. Because often living in a state of safety means that we're usually living under someone else's rules, right? We're safe if I'm following the rules and I'm doing what's expected of me and I know what to expect, right? This is how so-and-so did it, so I'm going to do it like this. And this is what society says to do, so I'm going to do it like this. And a lot of times that freedom is authenticity, and authenticity feels scary. Being yourself, I'm going to be weird. I'm going to be different. I want to do this thing that is uniquely me, but it feels dangerous. It feels out of line with everything I've ever known. I don't know what's going to happen. But that in itself is an opportunity for such a big spiritual lesson. A huge part of personal growth, of spiritual growth, is moving through things that we are afraid of to get to the other side where we can find that expansion and that alignment and that abundance. And your soul is often like calling you in that direction. That's why you often feel pulled towards something. You're like, I feel pulled to do this thing, but I'm scared. I feel pulled to leave my marriage, but I'm afraid of what's going to happen. I feel pulled to leave my job, or I feel pulled to start a business, but I don't know. I'm scared, or I don't believe in myself. I'm not confident that it's going to go well. And so we let fear hold us back. I remember in college, I really, really wanted to study abroad, and I went to the meeting with a friend and I listened about the program and I really wanted to go and I was all excited. And then I heard how much it costs. And I just remember, again, and I talked about this a lot in the November predictions video as well, but I have a lot of financial trauma in my life, and I have really struggled over my entire life with a scarcity mindset that I've really had to heal and work on and move through. And so in college, I heard the cost and I thought, how the hell would I get the money to do that? Like, my parents aren't just going to hand me that money. I don't know. I was working 1 or 2 jobs at the time, but I was like, those pay my bills. Like, I can't just save up thousands of dollars. And I kind of just got so discouraged. I was like, oh, well, I guess that's just not an option for me. I guess that's just not available. And then I kept kind of thumbing it over. And then later I actually met my now ex-husband, which also kind of discouraged me from going, because I was like, well, if I went, I'd be gone for months and blah, blah, blah. And my friend that I went to that meeting with did end up going, and she did end up spending that semester abroad. And I just remember looking back on that and being like, how ye of little faith, right? And then my sister ended up studying abroad, in Austria during college. And I just remember being like, I really let myself down. I really had an opportunity to do something amazing and I didn't even try. I got so discouraged by the financial aspect of it that I didn't even try. I didn't even go for it. And me now looks back on that and I just thought, how sad. Like, who knows what could have happened? Like, if I had just trusted the process and if I had just trusted, like, you know what, I don't know what this is going to look like, but I'm going to try and I'm going to figure it out. And if it doesn't work out, like, okay, but I'm going to try. I didn't even try. And I chose safety and familiarity over something different because I just didn't see how it was going to work. I didn't choose something unfamiliar because I was so familiar with financial scarcity that I didn't even attempt to go down the other path. And so we do these things all the time. And the important thing is to recognize when it's happening. Like, recognize when you are faced with an opportunity to choose safety or to choose freedom, and at least acknowledge that the moment is happening, regardless of what you choose. You know, even if you go, you know what, I can't do it. I'm not ready. I can't choose the freedom, at least not yet. Like, I'm just not there yet. You know, okay, fine. But at least you were aware enough to understand that that's what's happening, rather than just feeling that fear flare up, the fear kind of bubble up and going, oh, no, I can't. That's scary. I don't know. That's unfamiliar. I don't know how it's going to work out. I don't know if I would survive that. I don't know. I might be too sad. Something bad might happen. Like, I just can't do it. That is letting fear win in your life. When we make decision after decision after decision out of fear and letting that fear rule our lives, essentially, by being a part of all the decisions that we make, think about all the things you miss out on when you do that. Choosing freedom, choosing the scarier choices, taking the risks, that is literally how you become who you are meant to be. And the problem arises, the spiritual tension arises when you are trying to have both. You're trying to have your cake and eat it too. You want the evolution without any uncertainty, without any change, without any surrendering to the unknown. And the universe is just not going to let you have that, because it's such a big spiritual lesson to trust, to take a chance, to step out of your comfort zone. Helps you grow so much of a person, helps you grow into such a different person, a stronger version of yourself. This is something that I talk to my kids about a lot, you know, like not being afraid to do something different than other people are doing, like remembering that you are a leader, not a follower. We don't make choices based on other people's choices. We don't make bad decisions because other people are making bad decisions. It's that creating a really strong sense of self-worth and self-confidence, knowing that I have the ability to make a choice that's right for me, regardless of what's going on around you. And if you build that self-worth and that self-confidence, whether you already have a strong sense of self-worth or whether you're just now starting to build that in adulthood, it's never too late. Having a strong self-worth will help you so much when it comes to choosing the path of freedom. Because the stronger you are in your self-worth, the more that you trust yourself. And the more that you trust yourself, the less fear you have around staying safe, because you trust, I'm going to be okay. I know I can handle myself. I know that I can handle whatever decision I make, whatever comes at me, you know. And again, we're not jumping off of cliffs. We're not making stupid decisions, right? But we're taking little risks or big risks, right? Leaving your marriage, that's a big risk. But the more you trust yourself and that you're grounded in knowing who you are and knowing what you're capable of, the less you will let fear win. And a while ago, I did an entire episode on self-worth, and that's a really good listen. If that's something that you're actively trying to work on, I would go back and listen to that one. But let's talk about why the familiar feels safe even when it's not. And it's really just because you have a reference point for your brain. Because remember, your brain, I did an episode on this too, how your brain has habits. It just acts like an animal. Your brain is something that you have to train. It has automatic default habits that, again, are wired evolutionarily to keep you safe. It's a system, but it's an outdated system. And if you don't train it, if you don't ever work on it, if you don't ever attempt to shift the pathways to make different choices, it will just run your life on autopilot and you will lead a very safe and boring life. Because your brain just wants predictable, it wants a reference point because it's wired to keep you alive. That has a purpose, right? That serves a good purpose. We're trying to stay alive, but we're not trying to lead a boring life that is not aligned for us. The brain thinks that known pain is safety. The devil it knows. Like, I know how to handle this, so that's safer. It's less scary because I've done this before. I have a reference point. But if something is unknown, even if you feel like that thing is really exciting, even if you feel like there's a lot of joy to be had, that there's good things on the other side, your brain says, I don't know. I'm not familiar with that. I have no reference point for whether or not that will work out. So there could be pain. There could be discomfort there. And that feels scary. I'm not sure that we'll survive it, right? Metaphorically speaking. And not only that, and we talk about this a lot, but there's generational and ancestral patterns that reinforce this. Like you have subconscious programming through your generational line, whether it was taught to you or whether it was passed down quite literally through DNA, because that absolutely happens, which again, I think I said this in the last episode, but that is why people who say were adopted or never met their parents can still carry the same similarities, whether it's a personality, whether it's a habit, an addiction, and things like that, they carry from their parents because it's built into their DNA. So even if you weren't actually taught that, even if you weren't raised in a household that valued safety over freedom, it can literally be wired into you in a way that maybe you were always supposed to overcome. And we all have this, right? We all have different lessons that we're meant to learn. And so we all have these habits, these energetic loops that we enter where we learn or we're faced with opportunities to learn the same lesson over and over and over. And so we loop those same lessons in the same relationships, in the same money struggles, in the same self-sabotaging cycles because they feel safe. That's what we know, and so we're kind of familiar. So it's hard. We're trying to learn the lesson. Our soul wants us to move into the path of freedom and expansion and alignment. But we're like, but we're comfortable here. I'm familiar with this toxic marriage. So, I know what this looks like. I know how to handle it sort of. And I know what this looks like. I don't know what's on the other side. I could be happier, but what if I'm not? What if something goes terribly wrong? Because let's be honest, there's no guarantee that everything will work out perfectly, right? However, from my own personal perspective and belief, I believe that nothing would go catastrophically wrong if it weren't meant to. And that I'm not going to be faced with an option that on a soul level I didn't know was coming. And so it's kind of like for my personal belief, I choose, or I try to remind myself, doesn't mean it's easy. I just told you the whole story about my marriage, but I try to remind myself that when I am making choices that feel unknown or feel risky, that if I feel called to make that choice, if I'm feeling called in that direction, it's very likely something that I am meant to pursue. And I'm going to trust that even if it's hard along the way, or even if it's not perfectly smooth, that path is more aligned than the current suffering that I am sitting in. And so when I left my marriage, when I started this podcast instead of pursuing a quote unquote safe job, these are choices that I made where I didn't know how it was going to work out. And I'm still really not fully on the other side of either one of those things. I'm still kind of in the middle where I'm still moving through it. I'm still getting to the other side. But when I chose the freedom, when I chose the expansion, when I chose the unknown path, I broke out of an energetic loop. So the scarcity mindset, the financial trauma that I have looped and looped and looped over and over again for 35 freaking years, I am just now getting to the point. Again, I talk about this a lot in my November predictions episode. That's a really good one if you're thinking about joining the Patreon. But I had to make a choice that didn't feel safe, but it felt aligned. It felt free. It felt like this is what I'm being called to. I know that ultimately this is the more aligned path, but it's not going to be easy. I'm going to have to leave my safety bubble to get out of that. I'm going to have to leave my marriage where I was a stay-at-home mom. I'm going to have to pursue something that might not make sense to a lot of people. I'm going to have to be patient while the business grows. It's not just going to blow up overnight. I'm having to choose uncomfortable paths to get to the ultimate place of freedom and growth. So when we choose the freedom, it basically means that we're losing control of the known, of the familiar, before the new has fully arrived. And that's the scary part, is knowing that you're going to step into this zone, step into this space where not everything is going to work out right away. You're stepping into this unknown and you have to sit there uncomfortably for however long before you get to the other side, right? There's an unknown period. There's a waiting period. There's a transition period. It's not just like, oh, I'm going to make this decision and tomorrow everything's going to be fine and dandy and, everything will be great. Nope. There is a transition period, which is the growth period. The point where you leave the old and you leave the safety and you make the decision to move towards the new starts your transformational period, because you took the risk, you made the decision, and things will start to shift in your life when you do that. But it's also just the start of the transitional period where things begin to change and you begin to change and you begin to be faced with opportunities to change and to do internal work and to ground your nervous system when you start panicking and you're like, oh God, I did this thing. Was this the right decision? Am I safe? What's going to happen? Like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? What's it going to look like? That is your opportunity to trust yourself, to build your self-worth, to trust the universe, trust where you're headed, and trust that you made this decision for a reason. The test becomes, can you stay grounded? Can you trust what is coming and stay in alignment while this new thing is on its way to you? And this can be hard because often people rationalize their fear as being practical or waiting for the right time. And this is a really slippery slope, because there are certainly some people more than others are very, very logical. And honestly, again, Pluto and Capricorn, we've been raised in a society, especially if you're a millennial, that has always favored the practical and the logical and the safety, because that's what worked in Pluto and Capricorn. That was the system that we lived in. You hustle, you grind, you build structure and safety and logic, and like that was the energy. Now we're moving into Pluto and Aquarius. That is, for better or for worse, kind of out the window. Now, those same practices, that same mindset is not going to get you the same things that it did previously. Now the energy we are moving into wants nervous system regulation. It wants trust. It wants personal growth. It wants service to others. It wants spiritual freedom and growth. So now we are kind of going into this like battle, especially the more practical, the more, logic and rational you are as a person, the harder it's going to be when all this energy shifts, because that practical, that waiting for the right time, all that like rationalizing is going to keep you in that fear mindset. And again, none of these are black and white statements. It doesn't mean there's no room for logic or there's no room for being practical or there's no such thing as waiting for the right time. All of those things require discernment. They require your own personal discernment depending on the scenario and whatever. It doesn't mean there's no logic. However, it means that if you were fully relying on logic, if you were fully relying on practicality and doing things, quote unquote, the real world way, no, like I've been told, you need to get a real job. Like, what are you doing with this podcast? If I chose that out of just the fear of being practical or just being rational, I would absolutely miss out on what I believe is one of the core purposes of my life. Because again, we've been taught in this old energy, in this old way of doing things, that safety is noble and smart. Safety is logic, and making the right choices is making the safe choices. And sometimes risk is rewarded, but risks often fail. In my mind, from my own personal perspective, there's no such thing as a failed risk, because really what a failed risk is just means that's not your final stop. If you take a risk that you felt really good about and that you really wanted and it quote unquote failed, all that means is that wasn't the final destination. There's a step there. Either, you need to learn a little bit more before you get there, or maybe you need to pivot just a little bit. Like maybe that wasn't quite the right path and it's just a little bit to the right, a little bit different of a choice. You're just not quite there yet. But either way, there's something you're supposed to learn. There's something that's supposed to happen. It's just a step along the way. It's not a failed stop. Because let me tell you something, if you choose safety, if you are in a situation where you choose safety and you feel that feels wrong in your body, like if you chose the safe path, but in your body, you feel constricted or drained or numb or just like frustrated, trapped. For those 2 years when I was like trying to make the marriage work, even though I kind of knew it was over, but I was scared of making the leap, those entire 2 years felt awful internally. Internally, it was a constant battle. It was horrible on my mental health. It was horrible for my nervous system. I was constantly in fight or flight. It was really bad. It was like my body was screaming at me that even though it feels scary, this is not the right choice. This is suffering. This is not safety. So yeah, make the scary choice because that's the right choice. You know that this is calling you towards freedom and alignment. And if I had known how much better it would be, again, I would have done it so much sooner. So It's really not about abandoning safety. Again, it's kind of redefining it. The perspective that we need to carry around safety when we feel scared, when we feel like I don't know what's going to happen, is I am safe even when I don't know what's next. The unknown is not automatically bad. Like, I had so much fear around this thing that I was scared, what if it goes terribly wrong? And instead, it went terribly right. Not because my life is easy right now, but because everything that I was worried about did not happen. And by the way, a reminder that I do offer personal psychic readings specifically in this area. My bread and butter, so to speak, is guiding people towards their purpose. I am so passionate about this topic. This is really, truly wired into my energy, is helping you figure out, where am I going? What is my purpose? Like, what do I need to align towards and what do I need to do to get there? I also answer personal questions all the time about relationships or moves or job or whatever it is. But somewhere in there, I am also going to point you in the direction that your guides or your higher self or spirit tells you, like, this is where you're headed. Because of this exact thing, I think so many people just need somebody to be like, hey, it's gonna be okay. If you choose the scary route, it's gonna be okay. There's a lot of good stuff over there waiting for you. You were meant for this. You were meant for this more abundant path. You were meant for the freedom. Don't be afraid of it. I also have a course, Sensitive to Psychic, that is always linked in the show notes. That is literally about you learning to trust your intuition, how to talk to your guides and your higher self and tune into your psychic gifts on your own and learn how to do it yourself if you'd rather take that route. Because quite honestly, I should have talked about this more in the episode. But a big part of why I feel safe a lot of times making certain decisions in my life is because it's not just me. It's me seeking guidance from spirit, from my guides. And before I really developed these gifts, I went to other psychics to help me really tap into that. So I never felt like I was completely alone. I felt like, okay, I'm not just making this up. What I am being guided towards actually is the right choice. And this gives me a little bit of insight into how that will play out or what's going to happen. And that gave me a confident boost that I really, really needed at the time. So just a reminder, those are all linked in the show notes if that is something you would like to engage with. Thank you, friends, for listening to the episode. I am so grateful for you being here. Don't forget to check out the Patreon if you want to know what's coming up in November. I love you. I would love to hear from you. You can always email me at daremetoprosper@gmail.com and always leave a review. If you have enjoyed at least 2 of my episodes, please leave a review for the podcast and let me know your thoughts. All right. Love you guys. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next one.